18 months ago, my husband Michael staged his own death in a flash flood at the Grand Canyon to escape our marriage. Tonight, I'm standing outside a beachfront villa in Puerto Vallarta, watching him celebrate his engagement to another woman through floor-to-ceiling windows. The life insurance investigator who found him thinks I'm here for closure, but she has no idea that the woman peering through these palm trees is nothing like the grieving widow who collected that check. Michael chose to disappear rather than face our problems, so now I'm going to make sure his new paradise becomes his personal hell. You see, when someone you love dies, you grieve. When someone you love betrays you this completely, you evolve into something they never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 18 months ago, I believed I was living the American dream. Picture this, a stunning modern townhouse in Scottsdale, with mountain views that took your breath away every single morning. Michael Rodriguez and I had been married for 7 years, together for nearly 10. Our life looked like something straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Michael was a successful real estate investment advisor who specialized in luxury vacation properties across the Southwest. I ran my own marketing consultancy, working with tech startups that were revolutionizing everything from artificial intelligence to sustainable energy. We were the couple that other couples envied at dinner parties. Our weekends were filled with hiking adventures through Arizona's red rock formations, wine tastings in Sedona, and networking events where Michael would charm potential investors with his encyclopedic knowledge of emerging markets and his infectious enthusiasm for turning dreams into profitable reality. I had my own circle of success, crafting marketing campaigns that helped small tech companies compete with industry giants. My specialty was creating compelling brand narratives that made consumers connect emotionally with products they'd never heard of before. The irony of being an expert at detecting authentic storytelling while living with a master manipulator wasn't lost on me later. We looked perfect together, Michael with his dark hair and easy smile that made everyone in a room gravitate toward him, and me with my practical approach to life that balanced his more impulsive nature. We complemented each other in ways that felt natural and effortless. He'd come home with wild ideas about investing in some revolutionary property development, and I'd help him create the business plan that would actually make it happen. I'd stress about a difficult client, and he'd remind me to step back and see the bigger picture. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I thought. Our Scottsdale home was a testament to our combined success. Sleek contemporary design with clean lines and an open floor plan that flowed seamlessly from the gourmet kitchen to the living area. The back patio overlooked the desert landscape with the infinity pool that seemed to blend into the horizon. Michael had chosen the house specifically for its location in an exclusive gated community where privacy was guaranteed, and our neighbors included tech executives, professional athletes, and successful entrepreneurs. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business and respected each other's space. Michael's business was booming. Rodriguez Investment Properties had grown from a one-man operation to a boutique firm managing over $50 million in luxury vacation rental assets. His clients were wealthy individuals looking to diversify their portfolios with high-end properties in destinations like Aspen, Big Sur, and increasingly Mexico's Pacific coast. He'd built a reputation for finding hidden gems in emerging luxury markets, properties that would appreciate dramatically once the right infrastructure and marketing brought them to international attention. What I didn't know was that Michael's success was built on something far more complicated than savvy investment strategies. His frequent trips to scout properties in Mexico weren't just business. They were reconnaissance missions for an entirely different kind of life. While I was at home building marketing campaigns and managing client relationships, my husband was constructing an elaborate escape plan that would allow him to vanish completely from our life together. The changes started slowly, so gradually that I attributed them to normal fluctuations in a long-term relationship. Michael began spending more time at the gym, transforming his previously soft physique into something lean and athletic. He claimed it was stress relief from managing increasingly demanding clients, but he'd never shown interest in fitness before. The man who used to complain about walking to the mailbox was suddenly running 5 miles every morning and spending hours lifting weights. His eating habits changed too. The Michael who used to demolish pizza and beer during Sunday football games started following a strict diet focused on lean proteins and vegetables. He said he wanted to set a good example for our future children, but we'd been trying to conceive for 2 years without success, and the topic had become a source of tension between us. Every negative pregnancy test felt like another small failure in our supposedly perfect life. The business trips became more frequent and longer. What used to be weekend scouting expeditions to potential investment properties turned into week-long disappearances to Mexico. Michael would return with stories about challenging negotiations with local property owners, complex legal issues that required multiple meetings, and cultural barriers that made communication difficult. He'd come back exhausted but oddly energized, like someone who'd been living a completely different life and was reluctantly returning to reality. His relationship with technology became increasingly secretive. The man who used to leave his phone lying around carelessly started taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. He'd step outside to take calls, claiming his clients were paranoid about privacy and insisted on secure communication. When I asked about specific deals or clients, he'd deflect with vague references to non-disclosure agreements and the sensitive nature of international real estate transactions. But the most troubling change was in our physical relationship. Michael became distant in ways that couldn't be explained by work stress or fertility concerns. The easy intimacy we'd shared for years evaporated gradually, replaced by polite consideration that felt more like roommates than married partners. He'd initiate conversations about our future, but they felt scripted, as if he was going through the motions of being a devoted husband while his mind was somewhere else entirely. I tried addressing these changes direct. During quiet dinners at home, I'd ask if something was bothering him, if there were problems with the business I could help solve, if our struggles with starting a family were affecting him more than he was admitting. Michael would always have reasonable explanation. The business was expanding faster than expected, requiring more hands-on management. The clients were demanding and unpredictable. The international nature of the work was more stressful than he'd anticipated. He'd counter my concerns with gestures that seemed designed to reassure me. Surprise weekend trips to San Diego, expensive jewelry for no particular occasion, tickets to concerts by artists I'd mentioned wanting to see. These gifts felt different from his previous spontaneous romantic gestures, more calculated and less connected to actual moments of affection. But I wanted to believe they were evidence that my concerns were unfounded, that we were simply going through a rough patch that successful couples navigate together. The evening that changed everything started like any other. We were having dinner at our favorite restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale, an intimate Mexican place called Casa Nueva, where we'd celebrated every anniversary since our 3rd year together. The familiar surroundings made Michael's unusual behavior even more noticeable. He kept checking his phone despite their strict no devices policy, and he barely touched his usual order of carne asada tacos. "Sarah," he said suddenly, reaching across the table to take my hand. His fingers felt cold despite the warm restaurant. "I need you to know that everything I've been doing, all the traveling and the long hours, it's all been to build something secure for us, for our future." I laughed, thinking he was being dramatic about some business stress. "Michael, you're starting to sound like you're planning to disappear into witness protection. It's just real estate." But he didn't smile at my joke. Instead, he stared at me with an intensity I'd never seen before, as if he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. "Promise me something," he said, his voice unusually serious. "If anything ever happens to me, if something goes wrong with one of these deals, or if I get caught up in some kind of legal situation, promise me you'll just move on. Don't try to investigate or get involved. Just take care of yourself and be happy." The request seemed absurd. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Michael. You're being paranoid about business deals that are probably going perfectly fine. You always worry too much about things you can't control." He squeezed my hand tighter. "Just promise me, Sarah. Promise me you'll let go and move forward, if something happens." Looking back, I realized that conversation was his attempt at saying goodbye without actually admitting he was planning to abandon our life together. He was already mentally rehearsing his disappearance, trying to plant suggestions that would make me less likely to investigate when he vanished, but in the moment I interpreted his intensity as work stress mixed with our ongoing fertility struggle. I promised him what he wanted to hear because I thought I was reassuring an anxious husband, not enabling an elaborate deception. The call came at 5:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the alarm clock, trying to decide whether to get up early for a client presentation or sleep for another hour. The ringtone jolted me from that half-awake state where your mind hasn't quite engaged with reality yet. Mrs. Rodriguez. The voice belonged to a park ranger named Officer James Patterson, from Grand Canyon National Park. I'm calling about your husband, Michael Rodriguez. His vehicle was found abandoned at the South Rim trailhead yesterday evening. We've initiated a search and rescue operation, but I need you to understand that weather conditions are extremely challenging right now. The words didn't make sense at first. Michael was supposed to be in Phoenix, meeting with potential investors about a property development project. He'd left the house Monday morning wearing his usual business attire, carrying his leather briefcase and talking about a presentation that could secure funding for a luxury resort concept. The idea that he was at the Grand Canyon, alone, made no sense within the context of our normal life. There must be some mistake, I told Officer Patterson, my voice still thick with sleep and confusion. Michael wouldn't go hiking alone, especially not during the week. He had important meetings scheduled, but there was no mistake. Michael's BMW had been found in the parking area for one of the more challenging hiking trails, his wallet and identification locked inside the vehicle. A flash flood warning had been issued for the entire region, and several hikers had been evacuated from dangerous areas. The assumption was that Michael had been caught in rapidly rising water and swept away before he could reach safety. For 3 weeks, I lived in a surreal bubble of search operations and media attention. Grand Canyon rescue teams combed the areas where floodwaters might have carried someone, using helicopters and trained dogs to search for any trace of Michael's remains. The local news picked up the story of the successful businessman, who'd apparently decided to take a solo hike and been caught in a freak weather event. I gave interviews pleading for anyone with information to come forward, describing Michael as an experienced outdoorsman who would never take unnecessary risks. The community. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The community response was overwhelming. Michael's clients sent flowers and offered financial assistance. My tech industry contacts rallied around me with practical support, helping manage my business while I focused on the search efforts. Our neighbors in the gated community took turns bringing meals and handling daily tasks. I was too distracted to manage. Everyone treated me like a tragic widow even though no body had been found. The life insurance process moved surprisingly smoothly. Michael had a policy worth $1.8 million through his business, with me as the sole beneficiary. The insurance company's initial investigation was routine, focused mainly on confirming that the policy premiums were current and that there were no recent changes suggesting fraud. Robert Kane, Michael's business partner, handled most of the paperwork and helped me navigate the legal complexities of declaring someone dead without recovering remains. Michael talked about you constantly, Robert told me during one of our meetings at the Rodriguez Investment Properties office. The space felt empty without Michael's energetic presence, his desk still covered with property listings and development proposals. He wanted to make sure you'd be completely taken care of if anything happened to him. The insurance policy, the business structure, everything was designed to protect you, but grief has a way of making you notice details that don't quite fit the official narrative. Like how Michael's hiking boots were still in our closet, even though he'd supposedly been wearing them during his final trail adventure. Like how his passport was missing from our home safe, despite the fact that domestic hiking wouldn't require international identification. Like how I found a credit card statement showing purchases at outdoor gear stores in locations I'd never heard him mention, all charged during times when he claimed to be in business meetings. The most troubling discovery came when I was sorting through Michael's office at home, trying to organize his business documents for Robert. Hidden behind a family photo was a business card for a private investigator in Los Angeles named Luis Hernandez. When I called the number, a gravelly voice answered immediately, as if he'd been expecting someone to contact him. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said before I could even introduce myself. "I wondered when you might reach out. I think we need to meet in person to discuss your husband's recent activity." The flight to Los Angeles felt like stepping into an alternate reality where everything I thought I knew about my marriage might be fiction. Luis Hernandez had been cryptic on the phone, refusing to discuss details over what he called unsecured communication. His office was located in a weathered strip mall in East LA, squeezed between a check-cashing service and a restaurant that advertised authentic Salvadoran cuisine. The building's faded exterior and cracked parking lot suggested either discretion or financial struggles, but something about the man's voice had convinced me this meeting was worth the risk. Hernandez opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for my arrival. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of alert eyes that suggested decades of observing human behavior. His office was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized, with filing cabinets that looked like they contained more secrets than most government agencies. "Thank you for making the trip, Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, gesturing toward a chair across from his desk. "I know this situation must be incredibly difficult, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about what your husband was really doing during those business trips to Mexico." He pulled out a thick manila folder and spread its contents across the desk between us. The first thing I saw was a photograph of Michael, but he looked different. His hair was longer and lighter, bleached by constant sun exposure. He was wearing casual beach clothes instead of his usual business attire, and his smile was more relaxed than I'd seen it in months. But what made my stomach drop was the woman standing beside him with her arm around his waist. She was beautiful in an effortless way that made me immediately self-conscious. Probably in her late 20s, with long dark hair and the kind of natural tan that comes from living near the ocean. She wore a flowing sundress and sandals, the uniform of someone whose biggest worry was which beach to visit that day. They were standing in front of what looked like an upscale resort, palm trees swaying in the background and the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. "Her name is Carmen Delgado," Hernandez said, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "She works as an activities coordinator at the Palmas Resort in Puerto Vallarta. They've been together for approximately 8 months, though Michael told her his name was Diego Martinez, and that he was a consultant helping develop luxury tourism properties along the Mexican coast." The room seemed to tilt around me as the implications sank in. 8 months meant their relationship had started while Michael was still very much married to me, still coming home every night to our Scottsdale townhouse, still making love to me and talking about our future together. Every business trip to Mexico had actually been visits to build a life with another woman. "How long have you known about this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your husband contacted me 11 months ago," Hernandez replied, consulting his notes. "He wanted background checks run on several people, including Carmen. He also requested assistance with what he called personal security matters, which in my experience usually means someone is planning to disappear or hide from legal problems." He showed me more photographs, a devastating chronology of Michael's double life, images of him and Carmen shopping together in Puerto Vallarta's downtown markets, sharing intimate dinners at beachfront restaurants, and walking hand in hand along beaches that looked like paradise. In every photo, Michael appeared completely relaxed and genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in our own relationship for months. "There's more," Hernandez continued, pulling out financial documents that made my blood run cold. "Your husband has been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts and his business accounts into offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. Over the past year, he's transferred approximately $2.3 million to accounts I can trace to shell companies registered in Mexico and Belize." The numbers were staggering. $2.3 million represented almost everything Michael and I had built together over 7 years of marriage: our emergency fund, our retirement savings, the money we'd been accumulating to eventually buy a larger house and start a family. He'd been methodically stealing our entire financial future while planning his escape. "The life insurance policy," I said suddenly, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "He never intended for me to need it because of his debt. He wanted me to have something to live on while he started over with stolen money in Mexico." Hernandez nodded grimly, The insurance payout was probably his way of managing guilt about leaving you completely destitute. In his mind, $1.8 million was enough to justify destroying your marriage and stealing your joint assets, but the financial betrayal was only part of the story. Hernandez showed me records indicating that Michael had been using his real estate business as a front for much more complicated activity. The luxury vacation rental properties he managed weren't just investments, they were part of a money laundering operation that moved cash for clients whose wealth came from decidedly non-legitimate sources. Your husband got involved with people who specialize in helping criminals clean their money through real estate transactions, Hernandez explained. High-end vacation properties are perfect for this kind of operation because their values are subjective and their ownership can be easily obscured through corporate structure. A drug dealer's dirty money goes in as payment for an overpriced beachfront villa, and clean investment income comes out through rental revenues and property appreciation. The scope of Michael's deception was breathtaking. While I'd been proudly telling friends about his business success, he'd been facilitating financial crimes that helped dangerous people hide the proceeds of drug trafficking, human smuggling, and other activities I didn't want to contemplate. Every expensive dinner we'd shared, every luxury vacation we'd taken, every piece of jewelry he'd given me had been paid for with money that came from human suffering. There's something else you need to understand, Hernandez said, his expression growing darker. The people your husband was working with don't typically allow their business partners to simply retire and disappear. When Michael staged his death and vanished to Mexico, he left behind clients who had millions of dollars tied up in properties he was managing. They're not the kind of people who accept losses gracefully. The implication was terrifying. Michael hadn't just betrayed me, he'd also betrayed criminals who had trusted him with their money. His elaborate disappearance might have fooled the insurance company and the search and rescue teams, but it had also made him a target for people who solved problems with violence rather than lawsuits. Do you think he's in danger? I asked, surprised to discover that some part of me still cared about Michael's safety despite everything he'd done. I think he's made enemies of people who have resources and motivation to track him down, Hernandez replied, which is why I was surprised when you called. Most wives in your situation would be content to take the insurance money and start over. Digging deeper into this situation could put you in danger too, but I wasn't most wives. The more I learned about Michael's betrayal, the more I felt something cold and determined settling in my chest where my heart used to be. This wasn't just about a cheating husband or even stolen money. This was about a man who had systematically destroyed everything I thought was real about my life while building a fantasy with another woman using resources that belonged to both of us. I want to see him, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I want to go to Puerto Vallarta and confront him face to face. Hernandez leaned back in his chair, studying me with professional interest. Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand your desire for closure, but you need to understand what you'd be walking into. Your husband is living under a false identity in a foreign country, surrounded by people who believe his story about being a widowed businessman starting over after tragedy. Confronting him directly could be dangerous for multiple reasons, but danger was no longer my primary concern. For 18 months I'd been grieving for a man who was living a new life with another woman. I'd attended memorial services, where people praised Michael's memory while he was probably lying on a beach with Carmen, laughing about how easily he'd fooled everyone. I'd struggled with guilt over not being able to save him when he'd never been in any real danger. What would you need to help me find him? I asked. Hernandez was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the professional and ethical implications of what I was requesting. Miss Rodriguez, I need you to understand that what you're contemplating could have serious legal consequences. If you confront your husband in Mexico, you could be charged with stalking or harassment under both American and Mexican law. If his new associates discover that his past includes complications like a living wife, they might decide to eliminate those complications permanently. The warnings should have deterred me, but instead they crystallized my resolve. Michael had spent months planning his elaborate deception,
carefully orchestrating every detail to ensure his escape was successful. He'd researched flash flood patterns at the Grand Canyon to make his disappearance credible. He'd built a relationship with Carmen while lying about his identity and marital status. He'd stolen millions of dollars and laundered money for criminals while maintaining the facade of a loving husband. He destroyed my entire life while planning his paradise, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I spent 18 months believing I'd failed to save the man I loved, when actually he was building a new existence with another woman using money he stole from our marriage. I deserved the chance to look him in the eye and show him exactly what his choices cost. Hernandez opened another file and spread out what appeared to be surveillance photographs taken from a considerable distance. They showed Michael and Carmen at various locations around Puerto Vallarta, living what looked like an extended vacation, funded by embezzled assets. In one image, they were browsing expensive jewelry in an upscale boutique. Another showed them dining at a restaurant that obviously catered to wealthy tourists and expatriates. Your husband is living very comfortably, Hernandez observed. The resort where Carmen works gave him credentials as a tourism development consultant, which provides perfect cover for someone who needs to explain having significant financial resources without traditional employment. He's rented a beachfront villa in an exclusive area that caters to American expatriates who value privacy and don't ask too many questions about their neighbors' backgrounds. The photographs painted a picture of the life Michael had chosen over our marriage. Lazy mornings on private beaches, romantic dinners with ocean views, and the kind of carefree existence that our responsible, goal-oriented life in Scottsdale had never provided. He'd traded our shared dreams of family and stability for an eternal vacation, with a woman who had no idea she was dating a married man who'd faked his own death. There's something else, Hernandez said, pulling out a document that looked like official correspondence. I've been monitoring communications between Michael and Robert Kane, his business partner. Based on encrypted messages I've been able to intercept, it appears they're planning to liquidate the remaining assets of Rodriguez investment properties and transfer everything to offshore accounts. Your husband isn't planning to return to his old life ever. The news hit me like a physical blow. Robert Kane, who had been so supportive during my supposed widowhood, who had helped me navigate the insurance claims and legal complexities, was actually Michael's accomplice in stealing everything we'd built together. His sympathy and assistance had been part of the elaborate performance designed to keep me from investigating too closely. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Conservatively, another $4 million in liquid assets, plus property holdings that could be worth twice that much depending on current market conditions, Hernandez replied. If they successfully liquidate everything, your husband will have stolen approximately $10 million from his clients and business partners, not counting what he took from your personal accounts. $10 million. The number was almost incomprehensible. Michael hadn't just been planning to escape our marriage, he'd been orchestrating one of the most elaborate financial frauds I'd ever heard of, and somehow he'd managed to convince everyone, including me, that he was simply a successful businessman who'd tragically died in a hiking accident. I want to hire you, I said suddenly, not just to provide information, but to help me plan a confrontation that exposes everything he's done. I want Carmen to know she's been dating a married man who faked his death. I want his criminal associates to know he stole their money and left them holding worthless properties. And I want Michael to understand that his carefully constructed new life is about to become a nightmare. Hernandez studied me for several minutes, clearly assessing whether I was serious about pursuing such a dangerous course of action. Mrs. Rodriguez, what you're describing isn't just confrontation, it's revenge. And revenge against people with the resources and connections your husband has cultivated could have consequences you haven't considered. But I was beyond caring about consequences. For 18 months I'd been living in the wreckage of what I thought was a tragic loss. I'd attended grief counseling sessions where I blamed myself for not recognizing the signs of Michael's supposed depression.
I'd restructured my entire business to accommodate the emotional demands of widowhood. I'd turned down romantic possibilities because I wasn't ready to move on from my deceased husband. Meanwhile, Michael had been living in paradise with another woman, probably laughing about how thoroughly he'd fooled everyone. He'd attended his own memorial service through video calls, watching friends and family grieve for him while he planned his next romantic dinner with Carmen. The psychological cruelty of that deception was almost worse than the financial theft. What would a plan like that involve? I asked. Hernandez opened his laptop and pulled up what appeared to be detailed surveillance records. Your husband and Carmen have established very predictable routines, he said, showing me a calendar marked with various activities and locations. Every Tuesday, they have dinner at a restaurant called Mariscos del Mar. Every Thursday, Carmen teaches yoga classes at the resort, while Michael meets with potential investors who think he's developing luxury tourism properties. Every Saturday, they attend a social gathering for American expatriates at a private club called Casa Blanca. The routine nature of their life made sense. Michael had always been someone who thrived on structure and predictability, even when that structure was built on lies and theft. In Puerto Vallarta, he'd simply created a new routine that accommodated his false identity and criminal activity. The expatriate community is particularly interesting, Hernandez continued. It's small enough that everyone knows everyone else's business, but insular enough that they rarely question someone's background if they have money and fit in socially. Michael has become quite popular because of his supposed expertise in tourism development and his willingness to invest in local businesses. I studied the photographs and documents spread across Hernandez's desk, beginning to understand the full scope of what Michael had built in Mexico. It wasn't just a romantic escape. It was a complete alternate identity that allowed him to function as a respected businessman while hiding from the consequences of his crimes in the United States. How would we expose him without putting ourselves in danger? Very carefully, Hernandez replied. The people your husband was laundering money for have connections throughout Mexico's business and political establishments. If we move too quickly or too obviously, they could make both of us disappear permanently. But if we're smart about it, we could use their own criminal network against them. He pulled out another set of documents that looked like financial records and legal correspondence. Your husband's former clients are already getting suspicious about delayed returns on their investments and properties that aren't generating expected revenue. If the right information reached the right people, they might decide to investigate Michael's disappearance more thoroughly than the American authorities did. The idea was both brilliant and terrifying. Instead of confronting Michael directly, we could expose his fraud to the very criminals he'd betrayed, letting them handle the justice that the legal system couldn't provide. It would require careful planning and precise timing, but it offered the possibility of destroying Michael's new life while keeping me safely out of the line of fire. There's something else you should know, Hernandez said, his expression growing serious. I've been investigating this situation for months, which means I've also been investigating you. I needed to be sure you weren't part of your husband's schemes before I agreed to help expose them. The revelation should have offended me, but instead I felt a grudging respect for his thoroughness. What did you find? A woman who built a successful business through honest work, who genuinely loved her husband despite his obvious character flaws, and who has been systematically betrayed by almost everyone she trusted. He replied. Also someone who's stronger than she realizes and more capable of surviving this situation than her husband probably anticipated. His assessment surprised me. I'd been feeling weak and naive ever since learning about Michael's deception, convinced that any intelligent woman should have seen through his lies. But Hernandez was suggesting that my survival and my willingness to seek the truth demonstrated strength rather than gullibility. What's the next step? I asked. First, we need to gather more information about Michael's current financial situation and his relationships with Carmen and his criminal associates, Hernandez said, beginning to organize the documents back into their folder. Then we need to identify the best way to expose his fraud without putting you in immediate danger. This isn't going to be quick or simple, Mrs. Rodriguez. Are you prepared for a long-term commitment to seeing this through? I thought about the 18 months I'd spent grieving for a man who was living happily with another woman. I thought about the stolen money that was supposed to fund our shared future. I thought about the memorial service, where I'd cried genuine tears while Michael was probably celebrating his successful escape. Most of all, I thought about Carmen, who was living what she believed was a romantic dream with a man who had built their entire relationship on lies. I'm prepared, I said. Meaning it completely. Michael chose to disappear rather than face our problems. Now I'm going to make sure his new life disappears too. As I left Hernandez's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since learning about Michael's supposed death. Purpose. For 18 months, I'd been drifting through the motions of rebuilding my life while carrying the weight of unresolved grief. Now I had a clear objective that required all of my intelligence, determination, and business skills. The woman who had been Sarah Rodriguez, grieving widow, was about to become something much more dangerous. Sarah Rodriguez, instrument of justice, and Michael was going to discover that the wife he'd abandoned was far more capable than he'd ever imagined. 3 weeks after my meeting with Hernandez, I was sitting in my Scottsdale home office, staring at airline tickets to Puerto Vallarta, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman who introduced herself as Amanda Foster, a senior life insurance investigator from Continental Mutual Insurance Company. Miss Rodriguez, I apologize for the delay in contacting you, but we've discovered some irregularities in your husband's policy that require immediate attention, she said, her tone professional but urgent. I need to meet with you as soon as possible to discuss new information that's come to light regarding Mr. Rodriguez's disappearance. My blood ran cold. After 18 months of believing the insurance matter was completely settled, the last thing I wanted was scrutiny from investigators who might uncover my own recent discoveries about Michael's fraud. What kind of irregularities? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The kind that suggest your husband's death may not have been as straightforward as initially believed. Amanda replied, I'm flying out from Denver tomorrow morning. Can you meet me at 2 o'clock at the Continental Mutual offices in Scottsdale? The meeting felt like walking into a trap, but refusing would have raised more suspicions than cooperating. Amanda Foster turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with the kind of methodical demeanor that suggested years of uncovering insurance fraud. Her office was sterile and professional, dominated by computer monitors displaying financial records and investigation reports. Mrs. Rodriguez, thank you for coming in, she said, gesturing toward a chair across from her desk. I want to be direct with you because time is critical. We have reason to believe your husband staged his own death, and we need your help to locate him before he disappears permanently. The words hit me like electricity, but I forced myself to appear shocked rather than relieved. That's impossible, I said, channeling the genuine disbelief I'd felt 3 weeks earlier. Michael died in a flash flood at the Grand Canyon. There was a massive search operation. Amanda opened a thick file and spread out documents that looked disturbingly similar to the evidence Hernandez had shown me. Mrs. Rodriguez, your husband's financial activities in the months before his disappearance follow a pattern we see frequently in staged death cases. Large cash withdrawals, transfers to offshore accounts, and the systematic liquidation of assets that could be easily traced. She showed me bank records I'd never seen before, documenting transactions that painted a devastating picture of premeditation. Michael had been moving money for over a year, not just the few months Hernandez had tracked. The scope of his planning was even more elaborate than I'd realized. There's also the matter of his supposed hiking trip. Amanda continued, pulling out weather reports and trail records. Mr. Rodriguez had no documented experience with challenging hiking, yet he supposedly chose one of the most dangerous trails in the park during a flash flood warning. Our investigation found no witnesses who saw him on the trail, and his hiking gear was purchased with cash from stores that don't maintain detailed security footage. The evidence was damning, but what concerned me most was how much Amanda seemed to know about Michael's activity. If an insurance investigator could uncover this information, it meant other people might be tracking him as well. The criminals he'd betrayed, law enforcement agencies, or worse. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to ask you directly, Amanda said, leaning forward with intense focus. Have you had any contact with your husband since his supposed death? Any indication that he might still be alive? The question put me in an impossible position. Lying to a federal investigator could result in criminal charges, but telling the truth about my recent discoveries would expose my own plans for confronting Michael. I decided on a carefully edited version of the truth. I've had some suspicions, I admit. There were inconsistencies that bothered me. Missing items from our home, financial irregularities I couldn't explain, but I thought I was just looking for reasons to blame myself for not preventing his death. Amanda nodded as if this response confirmed something she'd already suspected. Miss Rodriguez, Those instincts were correct. We believe your husband is alive and living in Mexico under a false identity. More importantly, we believe he's in immediate danger from people who have their own reasons for wanting to find him. She pulled out surveillance photographs that made my stomach drop. Images of Michael and Carmen, but also pictures of dangerous-looking men who were clearly watching them from a distance. The photos were time-stamped from just 2 weeks ago, meaning Michael's paradise was already under threat. Who are those men? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Associates of people your husband was laundering money for through his real estate business, Amanda replied. When he disappeared, he left behind approximately $8 million in assets that belonged to some very unforgiving individuals. They've been patient for 18 months, but that patience is running out. The number was even higher than Hernandez had estimated. Michael hadn't just stolen from our marriage and his legitimate clients. He'd betrayed criminal organizations with the resources and motivation to hunt him down anywhere in the world. His carefully planned paradise was about to become a war zone. Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm going to be frank with you, Amanda continued. Continental Mutual has a vested interest in recovering the $1.8 million we paid out on your husband's policy, but more importantly, we have information that suggests you might be in danger as well. If these people can't find your husband, they might decide to use you as leverage to force him out of hiding. The threat was something I hadn't considered. In my focus on confronting Michael and exposing his betrayal, I'd overlooked the possibility that his criminal associates might view me as a valuable asset for applying pressure. A living wife could be far more useful than a dead one if they needed to motivate Michael to cooperate. What do you want from me? I asked. Help us find him before they do, Amanda said simply. You know your husband better than anyone. You understand his patterns, his preferences, his psychological make. With your assistance we can locate him quickly and safely, which serves everyone's interests except the criminals who want him dead. The proposal was tempting but complicated. Working with Amanda would provide official protection and resources I couldn't access on my own, but it would also mean surrendering control over the confrontation I'd been planning. My opportunity for personal justice might be lost in the bureaucratic machinery of insurance fraud investigation. There's something else you should know, Amanda said, pulling out another document. We've been monitoring communications between your husband and Robert Kane. They're planning to liquidate the remaining assets of Rodriguez investment properties within the next month and transfer everything to accounts in the Cayman Islands. If they succeed, recovering the stolen money becomes virtually impossible. The timeline was accelerating faster than I'd anticipated. Michael wasn't just living comfortably in Mexico, he was preparing for his final disappearance. Once he successfully moved all the stolen assets offshore, he could vanish completely, leaving no trail for investigators or criminals to follow. Carmen would probably disappear with him, unaware that she was becoming an accomplice to international financial crimes. Miss Rodriguez, I need a decision, Amanda pressed. Will you help us locate your husband before he disappears forever? I stared at the surveillance photographs of Michael and Carmen, thinking about the 18 months I'd spent grieving for a man who was planning romantic dinners with another woman. The desire for personal confrontation burned in my chest, but the practical part of my mind recognized that Amanda's resources offered the best chance of actually reaching Michael before he vanished. What would helping you involve? I traveled to Puerto Vallarta as our undercover consultant, Amanda replied. Your presence would be explained as a widow finally ready to visit the place where her husband dreamed of retiring. It's a plausible cover story that would allow you to move freely in the expatriate community where your husband has established himself. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of sneaking around Mexico trying to avoid detection, I would be operating with official backing and a legitimate reason for being there. It would also provide protection against the criminals who were hunting Michael, since harming an insurance investigator would bring unwanted federal attention to their operations. There's one condition, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. When we find Michael, I want to be the one who confronts him first. Before you arrest him, before you involve local authorities, I want 10 minutes alone with the man who destroyed my life. Amanda studied me carefully, clearly weighing the professional risks of agreeing to such a request. Miss Rodriguez, What you're asking could compromise the investigation and put you in personal danger. Your husband isn't just a fraud. He's involved with people who solve problems through violence, but I was beyond caring about standard procedures or personal safety. The woman who had spent 18 months blaming herself for failing to save her husband was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice sometimes required taking calculated risks. 10 minutes, I repeated. That's all I'm asking for. After a long pause, Amanda nodded slowly. 10 minutes, she agreed. But you'll be wearing a wire, and our team will be positioned to intervene immediately if the situation becomes dangerous. We spent the next 2 hours planning the operation with a level of detail that impressed me. Amanda's team had been investigating Michael's activities for months, building a comprehensive picture of his daily routines and social connections in Puerto Vallarta. They'd identified his villa, his favorite restaurants, his business meetings, and most importantly, his relationship with Carmen. Your husband has become quite popular in the expatriate community, Amanda explained, showing me social media posts and local newspaper articles. He's positioned himself as a successful tourism consultant, who's helping develop sustainable luxury properties along the coast. He's even been quoted in travel magazines about the future of eco-friendly resorts in Mexico. The irony was staggering. Michael had built his new identity around environmental sustainability and responsible tourism while laundering money for criminals whose activities destroyed communities and corrupted government. He'd become a respected voice in conversations about ethical business practices, while systematically stealing from everyone who trusted him. There's something else, Amanda said, pulling out what appeared to be wedding planning document. Your husband and Carmen Delgado are planning to marry next month in a ceremony at the Palmas Resort where she works. If he succeeds in liquidating his remaining assets and completing this marriage under his false identity, tracking him becomes exponentially more difficult. The news hit me like a physical blow. Michael wasn't just living with another woman, he was preparing to marry her while still legally married to me. The psychological cruelty of that betrayal was almost incomprehensible. He'd attended memorial services where friends grieved for him while planning a wedding celebration with his new life. The ceremony is scheduled for 3 weeks from Saturday, Amanda continued, which gives us a very narrow window to locate him and expose his fraud before he disappears permanently into international waters with a new wife and stolen millions. 3 weeks. The timeline meant abandoning any careful long-term planning in favor of immediate action, but it also provided a perfect opportunity for the kind of dramatic confrontation I'd been imagining. Nothing would be more devastating to Michael's carefully constructed paradise than having his supposedly dead wife appear at his wedding to another woman. I want to be there, I said suddenly. At the wedding ceremony, I want to walk down that aisle and show everyone exactly who Diego Martinez really is. Amanda's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching admiration. Miss Rodriguez, what you're describing would certainly expose your husband's fraud, but it would also put you in extreme danger. His criminal associates will be watching. Local authorities might not be able to protect you, and your husband himself might react violently to being cornered so publicly. But the image of Michael's face when he saw me walking toward him in a wedding dress had crystallized into an obsession I couldn't shake. After 18 months of grieving for a man who was planning romantic celebrations with another woman, the poetic justice was irresistible. He'd chosen to disappear rather than face our marital problems, so I would reappear at the most important moment of his new life. Mrs. Rodriguez, Amanda said carefully, I admire your courage, but what you're describing sounds more like revenge than just. Are you sure this is really about recovering stolen money and exposing fraud? The question forced me to examine my own motivations more honestly than I'd been willing to do since learning about Michael's betrayal. Was I seeking justice for all the people he'd victimized, or was I simply a scorned wife looking for the most dramatic possible way to destroy his happiness? Maybe it's both, I admit. Michael didn't just steal money, he stole 18 months of my life that I spent grieving for someone who was living in paradise with another woman. He made me blame myself for failing to save him when he was never in any danger. The insurance payout doesn't compensate for that kind of psychological abuse. Amanda nodded slowly, as if recognizing something familiar in my response. Mrs. Rodriguez, I've been investigating insurance fraud for 15 years,
and I've seen what this kind of betrayal does to people. The financial crimes are bad enough, but the emotional manipulation often causes more lasting damage than the stolen money. She pulled out another file and showed me photographs of other victims from similar cases. Wives who'd spent years grieving for husbands who were living comfortable lives in foreign countries. Children who'd grown up believing their fathers were dead while those same men were starting new families elsewhere. The psychological cruelty was a consistent pattern in staged death fraud cases. Your husband's case is particularly egregious because of the scale and premeditation involved, Amanda continued. Most people who fake their deaths are running from immediate crisis. Your husband spent over a year planning his disappearance while maintaining the facade of a loving marriage. That level of calculated deception suggests someone who views other people as disposable obstacles to his personal happiness. Her assessment confirmed what I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. Michael hadn't just made a desperate decision to escape financial problems. He'd methodically dismantled our entire relationship while building a replacement life with another woman. Every kiss, every conversation about our future, every moment of intimacy during that final year had been part of an elaborate performance. So you understand why I need to confront him personally, I said. This isn't just about money or insurance fraud. It's about showing him that the woman he thought he could discard and forget has become someone capable of destroying the paradise he built on lies. Amanda was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the professional and ethical implications of what I was proposing. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of resigned understanding. Mrs. Rodriguez, what you're describing violates every protocol for insurance fraud investigations, but it might also be the most effective way to ensure your husband doesn't disappear permanently. She opened her laptop and pulled up airline booking websites. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly and carefully. Your husband's criminal associates are already closing in, and any delay increases the risk for everyone involved. As we planned my travel to Puerto Vallarta, I felt something I hadn't experienced since learning about Michael's supposed death. Excitement. For 18 months I'd been a passive victim of his elaborate deception. Now I was about to become an active participant in exposing the truth. With federal backing and professional resources, the woman who boarded the plane to Mexico 2 days later was nothing like the grieving widow who'd collected life insurance benefits 18 months early. She was someone who understood that justice sometimes requires confronting the people who've wronged you directly, regardless of the personal cost or professional consequences. Michael had chosen to fake his death rather than face our marital problem. Now he was going to discover that his supposedly dead wife had evolved into someone far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined, and his carefully planned wedding to Carmen was about to become the stage for the most devastating revelation of his life. The flight to Puerto Vallarta felt like traveling toward a reckoning that had been 18 months in the making. As the plane descended toward the Mexican coast, I could see the beaches where Michael had been building his new life while I grieved for our destroyed marriage. Soon he would learn that some things you think you've buried have a way of rising from the dead when you least expect them. Puerto Vallarta's humid air hit me like a wall when I stepped off the plane, carrying the scents of ocean salt and tropical flowers that Michael had been breathing for 18 months while I mourned his supposed death. Amanda's team had booked me into the Hotel Rosita, a historic property in the old town that provided perfect cover for a widow taking her first vacation since her husband's tragic accident. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was staying just 10 blocks from the beachfront villa where Michael was living his fantasy life with Carmen. The first 3 days were dedicated to reconnaissance, carefully mapping Michael's daily routines while establishing my own cover story within the expatriate community. Amanda's intelligence had been remarkably accurate. Every morning at 7:30, Michael jogged along the Malecon boardwalk, his newly athletic physique moving with the confidence of someone who believed he'd successfully escaped his path. Every afternoon at 2 he met with potential investors at Café des Artistes, spinning elaborate stories about sustainable tourism developments that would transform Mexico's Pacific coast. I watched him from carefully chosen distances, using techniques Amanda's team had taught me for surveillance without detection. The man I observed bore only superficial resemblance to the husband I'd lived with for 7 years. His hair was lighter, bleached by constant sun exposure, and his skin had the deep tan of someone who spent every day outdoors, but the changes went deeper than physical appearance. His entire demeanor radiated a relaxed confidence I'd never seen during our marriage, as if he'd finally found the life he was meant to live. The most painful observations came when I watched him with Carmen. Their relationship displayed the kind of easy intimacy that our marriage had been moving away from during that final year when Michael was planning his escape. They held hands while walking through the markets, shared inside jokes over romantic dinners, and looked at each other with the genuine affection of people who believed they were building a future together. Carmen had no idea she was in love with a married man who'd faked his death to escape his previous life. On Thursday evening, I positioned myself at a restaurant called La Palapa where Amanda's surveillance had indicated Michael and Carmen would be having dinner. The open-air establishment overlooked the beach, with tables scattered across a sand floor illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows across the diners' faces. I chose a corner table where I could observe without being noticed, ordering local seafood and pretending to read while actually watching the man who'd destroyed my life enjoy a romantic evening with his unwitting accomplice. They arrived at 8:15, exactly as predicted. Carmen wore a flowing white dress that made her look ethereal in the flickering torchlight, while Michael had chosen casual linen pants and a shirt that emphasized his transformed physique. They were seated at a prime beachfront table where the sound of waves provided a romantic soundtrack to their conversation. Watching them together, I felt a complex mixture of rage and something disturbingly close to envy. "Diego has been working so hard on the new resort project," Carmen told their server, her voice carrying easily across the quiet restaurant. "He's trying to convince investors to fund a completely sustainable development that won't damage the local ecosystem. It's exactly the kind of vision Puerto Vallarta needs." Michael smiled at her description, playing the role of environmental advocate with convincing enthusiasm. "The tourism industry has been too focused on short-term profits," he said, his voice carrying the same passionate conviction he'd once used to discuss real estate investments with me. "We have an opportunity to create something that benefits the local community while preserving the natural beauty that draws people here in the first place." The performance was masterful. Michael had transformed himself from a money laundering criminal into an idealistic businessman whose primary concern was protecting Mexico's environment and supporting local community. Everyone who met Diego Martinez probably saw him as exactly the kind of responsible developer the region needed. The reality that his sustainable tourism projects were funded by stolen money and designed to launder criminal proceeds was carefully hidden beneath layers of environmental rhetoric and community activism. As they shared a dessert of tres leches cake, Michael reached across the table to take Carmen's hand, his expression serious in the torchlight. "Carmen, there's something I want to discuss with you," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that I had to strain to hear. "Something about our future together." My stomach clenched as I realized I was about to witness Michael proposing to another woman while still legally married to me.
The psychological cruelty was breathtaking, but I forced myself to remain still and observe rather than intervening immediately. Amanda's plan required patience and precise timing. "I know we've been together for less than a year," Michael continued, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "But I've never felt more certain about anything in my life. Carmen, will you marry me?" The ring caught the torchlight as he opened the box, revealing a diamond that had probably cost more than most people in Puerto Vallarta earned in a year. Carmen's gasp of surprise and delight carried across the restaurant, drawing approving smiles from other diners who were witnessing what appeared to be a beautiful romantic moment. She nodded through tears of joy as Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their engagement with a kiss that made my chest burn with fury. "Yes, Diego. Yes," Carmen whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I love you so much. I can't believe this is really happening." The celebration continued for another hour, with champagne and congratulations from neighboring tables. Michael basked in the attention with the confidence of someone who believed his carefully constructed new identity was completely secure. Carmen kept looking at her ring in wonder, probably already planning the wedding that would make her an unknowing accomplice to international fraud. I left the restaurant before they did, walking slowly along the beach while processing what I'd witnessed. In 18 hours, I would attend their wedding ceremony at the Palmas Resort, where Michael's supposedly dead wife would make an appearance that would destroy his paradise forever. The anticipation was almost overwhelming, but I needed to remain focused on the practical details that would determine whether the confrontation succeeded or resulted in my own death. Friday morning brought news that accelerated our timeline dramatically. Amanda called my hotel room at 6 a.m. with information that changed everything about our planned operation. "Sarah, we have a problem," she said without preamble. Our surveillance team intercepted communications indicating that Michael's criminal associates have located him. They're planning to move against him tonight before the wedding ceremony. The development was both terrifying and opportunistic. If dangerous criminals were closing in on Michael, it meant our window for exposing him safely was narrowing rapidly, but it also meant that his carefully planned paradise was about to become a war zone regardless of our intervention. "What kind of move?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would be violent. "The kind that ensures he never testifies about money laundering operations or provides information about their criminal network," Amanda replied grimly. "These people don't leave loose ends, and Michael has been a very expensive loose end for 18 months. She explained that the criminal organization Michael had betrayed was planning to eliminate him during the wedding reception, when security would be focused on celebration rather than protection. The public nature of the event would provide perfect cover for what would appear to be a random act of violence in a region where such incidents weren't uncommon. "We need to move now," Amanda said. "If we're going to expose Michael and recover the stolen assets, it has to happen before tonight." The change in timeline meant abandoning the carefully choreographed wedding confrontation in favor of immediate action. Instead of dramatically appearing during the ceremony, I would need to confront Michael at his villa while he was preparing for what he believed would be the happiest day of his new life. Amanda's team had identified a window of opportunity between noon and 2 p.m., when Carmen would be at the resort preparing for the evening ceremony while Michael remained at home, handling last-minute business communication. The villa's security was minimal, designed more for privacy than protection, and Michael's confidence in his false identity meant he wasn't expecting any threats from his past. "Remember, you have 10 minutes alone with him before we intervene," Amanda reminded me as her technical team fitted me with recording equipment that was virtually undetectable. "Get him to admit his identity and confess to the fraud. Once we have that recorded confession, we can arrest him safely and begin recovering the stolen assets." The wire felt strange against my skin, a reminder that this confrontation would be preserved forever on government recording equipment. Every word Michael and I exchanged would become evidence in criminal proceedings that would probably last for years. The personal nature of our 18-year relationship would be reduced to legal testimony about insurance fraud and money laundering. At 11:30, I walked through Puerto Vallarta's old town toward the exclusive residential area where Michael had built his new life. The morning was already hot and humid, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon that suggested afternoon rain. The weather seemed appropriate for what was about to unfold. A tropical storm that would wash away the illusions Michael had been living with for 18 months. The villa was exactly as Amanda's surveillance photos had depicted it. A pristine white structure with blue trim, surrounded by bougainvillea and palm trees that provided privacy from neighboring property. A small pool sparkled in the courtyard, and expensive outdoor furniture was arranged to take advantage of ocean views that probably cost Michael more per month than most people earned in a year. It was the kind of paradise that wealthy expatriates created when money was no object and legal accountability was an ocean away. I could see Michael through the large windows that faced the courtyard, sitting at a desk with his laptop and several phones scattered around him. He was conducting business with the focused intensity I remembered from our marriage, probably finalizing financial transactions that would make his final disappearance possible after the wedding ceremony. The sight of him working so diligently to steal even more money while preparing to marry another woman crystallized every emotion I'd been carrying for 18 months into pure, cold determination. The front door was unlocked, a symptom of Michael's overconfidence in his false identity and secure location. I walked through the villa's tastefully decorated interior, noting details that revealed how thoroughly he'd embraced his new life. Photographs of him and Carmen were displayed prominently, showing romantic trips to various Mexican destinations. Art from local galleries decorated the walls, and the furniture was an expensive blend of contemporary and traditional Mexican style. Michael looked up from his computer as I entered his home office, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to absolute shock as recognition dawned. For several seconds, he simply stared at me as if I were a ghost materializing from his guilty conscience. His face went through a remarkable series of changes, from disbelief to fear to desperate calculation, as he tried to process how his supposedly dead wife had found him in his Mexican paradise. "Hello, Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "Or should I call you Diego? I have to admit, I'm impressed by how thoroughly you've reinvented yourself. The environmental consultant persona is particularly creative." He stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled as if sudden gestures might make me disappear or attack. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this isn't possible. You can't be here." "Why not?" I asked, settling into a chair across from his desk with deliberate casualness. "Because you're supposed to be dead. Because you staged an elaborate hiking accident to escape our marriage. Because you've been living in paradise with another woman while I spent 18 months grieving for you." The questions hit him like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the confidence he'd built as Diego Martin. The man who'd been passionately discussing sustainable tourism projects with investors was being replaced by someone who looked trapped and desperate. "Sarah, you don't understand," he said, reaching for explanations that might somehow justify the unjustifiable. "Our marriage was falling apart. We weren't happy. I was trying to build something better for both of us." The attempted rationalization was so insulting that I almost laughed. "Something better? Michael, you stole every penny we had together and left me to grieve for a dead husband while you built a new life with a woman who doesn't even know your real name. In what universe is that better for me?" He began pacing behind his desk, his mind clearly racing through possible explanations or escape strategies. "The business was in trouble," he said, his voice gaining strength as he found a narrative that cast him as a victim rather than a perpetrator. "I was involved with people who would have killed both of us if I hadn't disappeared. I was protecting you by staging my death." Protecting me? The claim was so outrageous that I couldn't maintain my composure. "Michael, you made me believe I'd failed to save the man I love. I spent months in therapy trying to understand why I hadn't recognized the signs of your supposed depression. You attended your own memorial service while I cried genuine tears for our destroyed future. I never meant for it to hurt you that much," he said, and for the first time his voice carried something that might have been genuine remorse. "I thought you'd move on quickly. You're strong and successful. I thought you'd build a better life without me." The confession revealed the depth of his narcissism and self-deception. Michael had convinced himself that abandoning me was actually a generous act that would free me to find happiness elsewhere. The possibility that I might genuinely love him and be devastated by his death had apparently never seriously occurred to him. "Move on quickly," I repeated, letting ice creep into my voice. "Michael, I'm still legally married to you. I haven't been able to build any kind of new life because I spent 18 months believing my husband died in a tragic accident. Meanwhile, you've been planning to marry Carmen while stealing millions of dollars from clients who trusted you." His expression shifted to something more calculating as he realized that I knew about more than just his personal betrayal. "How much do you know?" he asked carefully. "Everything," I said, pulling out copies of the financial records Hernandez and Amanda had shown me. The money laundering through Rodriguez investment properties, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the criminal organizations you were working with, the $8 million you stole before disappearing. Should I continue? Michael's face went pale as he realized the full scope of his exposure. "Sarah, if you know about those people, then you understand why I had to disappear. They would have killed me if I'd stayed. They still might kill me if they find out I'm alive." "They already know you're alive, Michael," I said, watching his remaining composure crumble. "They've been tracking you for weeks. In fact, they're planning to solve their Michael Rodriguez problem tonight, during your wedding reception." The news hit him like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, his face going ashen as the implications sank in. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm working with federal investigators who have been monitoring both you and your criminal associates," I explained. "The life insurance company figured out that your death was staged, and they want their $1.8 million back. The FBI wants to use your testimony to prosecute the money laundering network. and your former criminal partners want to make sure you never testify about anything. Michael's carefully constructed new life was collapsing around him in real time. The confident environmental consultant who'd been planning his wedding that morning was being replaced by a terrified fugitive who realized his past had finally caught up with him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "I want you to understand what your choices cost," I said, leaning forward to make sure he heard every word clearly. "I want you to confess to faking your death and stealing millions of dollars. I want you to admit that everything about Diego Martinez is a lie built on money you stole from people who trusted you." "And if I confess," he asked, "what happens then?" "Then you cooperate with federal investigators to help them prosecute the criminal network you were laundering money for," I replied. "You return every stolen dollar you can access. You face criminal charges for insurance fraud and money laundering. And you explain to Carmen that the man she fell in love with never existed." The mention of Carmen brought fresh pain to his expression. For all his narcissism and criminal behavior, he seemed to have developed genuine feelings for the woman who'd unknowingly become part of his elaborate deception. "Carmen doesn't deserve this," he said quietly. "She's innocent. She believed everything I told her about being a widowed businessman starting over." "You're right," I agreed. "Carmen doesn't deserve any of this. She doesn't deserve to marry a man who's already married to someone else. She doesn't deserve to become an unknowing accomplice to money laundering and fraud. And she certainly doesn't deserve to be in danger from criminals who want to eliminate anyone connected to your stolen money." Michael was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window toward the ocean, where he'd been planning to build his sustainable tourism empire. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally understood the full consequences of his choice. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "The money laundering started small, just a few transactions to help some clients move assets quietly. Then it grew bigger, and the clients became more dangerous, and I couldn't find a way out that didn't end with me dead. So you chose to make me think you were dead instead," I said. "I thought it was the only way to protect both of us," he replied. "I thought if Michael Rodriguez disappeared permanently, the dangerous people would move on to other concerns, and you'd be safe to build a new life. Instead, you left me grieving while you built a paradise with stolen money and another woman," I pointed out. "Michael, do you understand that your criminal associates are planning to kill Carmen too? They don't leave witnesses or loose ends. Everyone connected to you becomes a target." The realization that his selfishness had put Carmen in mortal danger seemed to break something fundamental in Michael's remaining resistance. "What do I need to do to keep her safe?" he asked. "Confess everything to federal investigators and cooperate completely with their prosecution of the criminal network," I said. "Help them recover the stolen money and provide testimony that puts these people in prison where they can't hurt anyone else." Michael looked around his beautiful villa one last time, as if memorizing details of the life he was about to lose forever. "The confession you want," he said slowly. "You need me to say it out loud, for recording equipment you're probably wearing." I nodded, impressed despite everything by his ability to deduce the technical aspects of the operation. "Yes, Michael, I need you to confess to faking your death, stealing money from our joint accounts and your business clients, and living under a false identity while planning to commit bigamy." He took a deep breath and looked directly at me, his expression resigned but clear. "My name is Michael Rodriguez. 18 months ago, I staged my own death in a flash flood at the Grand Canyon to escape mounting pressure from criminal associates and legal problems with my real estate business. I stole approximately $10 million from client accounts and personal assets before disappearing to Mexico, where I've been living under the false identity of Diego Martinez." The confession continued for several more minutes, with Michael detailing the money laundering operations, the offshore accounts, and his plans to permanently disappear after marrying Carmen under his false identity. Every word was being recorded by Amanda's equipment, providing federal prosecutors with exactly the evidence they needed to build comprehensive cases against both Michael and his criminal associates. "Is that sufficient?" he asked when he finished. "It's a start," I replied. "Now you need to call Carmen and explain that Diego Martinez doesn't exist, that you're married to someone else,
and that both of your lives are in immediate danger from people you betrayed. The phone call was heartbreaking to witness. Carmen's voice carried clearly through the villa as Michael destroyed her understanding of reality with clinical precision. She went through disbelief, anger, devastation, and finally terror as he explained the danger they were both facing from his criminal associate. "I'll be in federal custody within the hour," Michael told her. "You need to leave Puerto Vallarta immediately. Get on the first flight to anywhere outside Mexico and don't tell anyone where you're going. These people will kill you just for being associated with me." After he hung up, Michael looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You did this perfectly," he said. "You found me, exposed everything, and arranged for my capture without getting yourself killed in the process. I underestimated you completely." "You underestimated a lot of things," I replied. "You underestimated how much damage faking your death would cause. You underestimated how dangerous your criminal associates would become when you betrayed them. And you underestimated how determined I'd become to make sure you faced consequences for destroying my life." Amanda's team arrived exactly 10 minutes after Michael's confession as promised. They took him into custody with professional efficiency while securing his computers and financial records that would help trace the stolen money. The villa that had been his paradise for 18 months became a crime scene processing center for one of the largest insurance fraud cases in recent history. As federal agents led Michael away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. "Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "I really am sorry for all of it." I watched the man I'd been married to for 7 years disappear into federal custody, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The confrontation I'd been planning for weeks had succeeded beyond my expectations, but it didn't bring the emotional closure I'd hoped for. Michael's apology felt genuine but inadequate, like offering bandages for wounds that had already scarred over. 6 months later, I was sitting in a federal courtroom in Phoenix, watching Michael testify against the criminal organization that had been using his real estate business to launder drug money. His cooperation had led to dozens of arrests and the recovery of approximately $6 million in stolen assets. Carmen had successfully disappeared and was reportedly living quietly in Canada under federal protection. The insurance company had recovered their $1.8 million payout, and I'd received compensation for the assets Michael had stolen from our joint account. But the money felt hollow compared to the 18 months of grief and self-blame I'd endured while he lived in paradise with another woman. The woman who walked out of that courthouse was fundamentally different from the grieving widow who'd collected life insurance benefits 2 years earlier. She'd learned that sometimes the people you trust most are capable of devastating betrayal, but she'd also discovered that surviving such betrayal could make you stronger and more capable than you'd ever imagined. Michael received 15 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, money laundering and racketeering. The criminal organization he'd betrayed was dismantled through prosecutions that relied heavily on his testimony and financial record. Carmen sent me a letter through federal authorities, expressing gratitude for saving her life even though the process had destroyed her dreams of marriage and happiness. Today, I run a consulting firm that helps insurance companies investigate suspicious claims and expose staged death fraud. The experience of tracking down my supposedly dead husband taught me skills that are apparently quite valuable in the corporate world. I've helped expose dozens of similar schemes, preventing other families from enduring the psychological torture I experienced. Sometimes people ask if I ever forgave Michael for what he did to our marriage and my life. The answer is complicated. I forgave him enough to move forward without carrying hatred, but I never forgot the lesson about trusting people who show you through their actions that they value their own comfort over your emotional well. The villa in Puerto Vallarta was seized by Mexican authorities and eventually sold at auction. I heard it was purchased by a retired American couple who transformed it into a bed and breakfast for tourists who want to experience authentic Mexican hospitality. I hope they're happier there than Michael ever was, and I hope they built their dreams on honest money rather than stolen assets and broken promises. As for me, I've learned that the most important relationship you can have is with yourself, and that recovery from betrayal begins with refusing to let someone else's choices define your worth or limit your future possibility. Michael thought he could discard me and move on to a better life, but he discovered that some people become more dangerous when you underestimate their capacity for growth and determination. The woman he abandoned was naive enough to believe that love and trust were always reciprocated. The woman who exposed him understood that justice sometimes requires taking calculated risks, and that the best revenge against someone who tried to erase you is becoming someone they never imagined you could become. The questions hit him like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the confidence he'd built as Diego Martinez. The man who'd been passionately discussing sustainable tourism projects with investors was being replaced by someone who looked trapped and desperate. "Sarah, you don't understand," he said, reaching for explanations that might somehow justify the unjustifiable. "Our marriage was falling apart. We weren't happy. I was trying to build something better for both of us." The attempted rationalization was so insulting that I almost left. "Something better? Michael, you stole every penny we had together and left me to grieve for a dead husband while you built a new life with a woman who doesn't even know your real name. In what universe is that better for me?" He began pacing behind his desk, his mind clearly racing through possible explanations or escape strategies. "The business was in trouble," he said, his voice gaining strength as he found a narrative that cast him as a victim rather than a perpetrator. "I was involved with people who would have killed both of us if I hadn't disappeared. I was protecting you by staging my death." Protecting me? The claim was so outrageous that I couldn't maintain my composure. "Michael, you made me believe I'd failed to save the man I love. I spent months in therapy trying to understand why I hadn't recognized the signs of your supposed depression. You attended your own memorial service while I cried genuine tears for our destroyed future. I never meant for it to hurt you that much," he said, and for the first time his voice carried something that might have been genuine remorse. "I thought you'd move on quickly. You're strong and successful. I thought you'd build a better life without me." The confession revealed the depth of his narcissism and self-deception. Michael had convinced himself that abandoning me was actually a generous act that would free me to find happiness elsewhere. The possibility that I might genuinely love him and be devastated by his death had apparently never seriously occurred to him. "Move on quickly," I repeated, letting ice creep into my voice. "Michael, I'm still legally married to you. I haven't been able to build any kind of new life because I spent 18 months believing my husband died in a tragic accident. Meanwhile, you've been planning to marry Carmen while stealing millions of dollars from clients who trusted you." His expression shifted to something more calculating as he realized that I knew about more than just his personal betrayal. "How much do you know?" he asked carefully. "Everything," I said, pulling out copies of the financial records Hernandez and Amanda had shown me. The money laundering through Rodriguez investment properties, the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the criminal organizations you were working with, the $8 million you stole before disappearing. Should I continue? Michael's face went pale as he realized the full scope of his exposure. "Sarah, if you know about those people, then you understand why I had to disappear. They would have killed me if I'd stayed. They still might kill me if they find out I'm alive." "They already know you're alive, Michael," I said, watching his remaining composure crumble. "They've been tracking you for weeks. In fact, they're planning to solve their Michael Rodriguez problem tonight, during your wedding reception." The news hit him like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, his face going ashen as the implications sank in. "How do you know that?" "Because I'm working with federal investigators who have been monitoring both you and your criminal associates," I explained. "The life insurance company figured out that your death was staged, and they want their $1.8 million back. The FBI wants to use your testimony to prosecute the money laundering network, and your former criminal partners want to make sure you never testify about anything." Michael's carefully constructed new life was collapsing around him in real time. The confident environmental consultant who'd been planning his wedding that morning was being replaced by a terrified fugitive, who realized his past had finally caught up with him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "I want you to understand what your choices cost," I said, leaning forward to make sure he heard every word clearly. "I want you to confess to faking your death and stealing millions of dollars. I want you to admit that everything about Diego Martinez is a lie built on money you stole from people who trusted you." "And if I confess," he asked, "what happens then?" "Then you cooperate with federal investigators to help them prosecute the criminal network you were laundering money for," I replied. You return every stolen dollar you can access, you face criminal charges for insurance fraud and money laundering, and you explain to Carmen that the man she fell in love with never existed. The mention of Carmen brought fresh pain to his expression. For all his narcissism and criminal behavior, he seemed to have developed genuine feelings for the woman who'd unknowingly become part of his elaborate deception. Carmen doesn't deserve this, he said quietly. She's innocent. She believed everything I told her about being a widowed businessman starting over. You're right, I agreed. Carmen doesn't deserve any of this. She doesn't deserve to marry a man who's already married to someone else. She doesn't deserve to become an unknowing accomplice to money laundering and fraud, and she certainly doesn't deserve to be in danger from criminals who want to eliminate anyone connected to your stolen money. Michael was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window toward the ocean where he'd been planning to build his sustainable tourism empire. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally understood the full consequences of his choices. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. The money laundering started small, just a few transactions to help some clients move assets quietly. Then it grew bigger, and the clients became more dangerous, and I couldn't find a way out that didn't end with me dead. So you chose to make me think you were dead instead, I said. I thought it was the only way to protect both of us, he replied. I thought if Michael Rodriguez disappeared permanently, the dangerous people would move on to other concerns and you'd be safe to build a new life.
Instead, you left me grieving while you built a paradise with stolen money and another woman. I pointed out. Michael, do you understand that your criminal associates are planning to kill Carmen too? They don't leave witnesses or loose ends. Everyone connected to you becomes a target. The realization that his selfishness had put Carmen in mortal danger seemed to break something fundamental in Michael's remaining resistance. What do I need to do to keep her safe? He asked. Confess everything to federal investigators and cooperate completely with their prosecution of the criminal network, I said. Help them recover the stolen money and provide testimony that puts these people in prison where they can't hurt anyone else. Michael looked around his beautiful villa one last time, as if memorizing details of the life he was about to lose forever. The confession you want, he said slowly. You need me to say it out loud. For recording equipment you're probably wearing. I nodded, impressed despite everything by his ability to deduce the technical aspects of the operation. Yes, Michael. I need you to confess to faking your death, stealing money from our joint accounts and your business clients, and living under a false identity while planning to commit bigamy. He took a deep breath and looked directly at me, his expression resigned but clear. My name is Michael Rodriguez. 18 months ago, I staged my own death in a flash flood at the Grand Canyon to escape mounting pressure from criminal associates and legal problems with my real estate business. I stole approximately $10 million from client accounts and personal assets before disappearing to Mexico, where I've been living under the false identity of Diego Martinez. The confession continued for several more minutes, with Michael detailing the money laundering operations, the offshore accounts, and his plans to permanently disappear after marrying Carmen under his false identity. Every word was being recorded by Amanda's equipment, providing federal prosecutors with exactly the evidence they needed to build comprehensive cases against both Michael and his criminal associates. Is that sufficient? He asked when he finished. It's a start, I replied. Now you need to call Carmen and explain that Diego Martinez doesn't exist, that you're married to someone else, and that both of your lives are in immediate danger from people you betrayed. The phone call was heartbreaking to witness. Carmen's voice carried clearly through the villa as Michael destroyed her understanding of reality with clinical precision. She went through disbelief, anger, devastation, and finally terror, as he explained the danger they were both facing from his criminal associate. I'll be in federal custody within the hour, Michael told her. You need to leave Puerto Vallarta immediately. Get on the first flight to anywhere outside Mexico and don't tell anyone where you're going. These people will kill you just for being associated with me. After he hung up, Michael looked at me with something that might have been respect. You did this perfectly, he said. You found me, exposed everything, and arranged for my capture without getting yourself killed in the process. I underestimated you completely. You underestimate a lot of things, I replied. You underestimated how much damage faking your death would cause. You underestimated how dangerous your criminal associates would become when you betrayed them. And you underestimated how determined I'd become to make sure you faced consequences for destroying my life. Amanda's team arrived exactly 10 minutes after Michael's confession. As promised, they took him into custody with professional efficiency while securing his computers and financial records that would help trace the stolen money. The villa that had been his paradise for 18 months became a crime scene processing center for one of the largest insurance fraud cases in recent history. As federal agents led Michael away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one final time. "Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "I really am sorry. For all of it. I watched the man I'd been married to for 7 years disappear into federal custody, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The confrontation I'd been planning for weeks had succeeded beyond my expectations, but it didn't bring the emotional closure I'd hoped for. Michael's apology felt genuine but inadequate, like offering bandages for wounds that had already scarred over. The immediate aftermath of Michael's arrest was a whirlwind of federal investigations, media attention, and legal proceedings that consumed the next several months of my life. Amanda Foster became not just a professional colleague but something approaching a friend, as we worked together to unravel the full extent of Michael's criminal network and recover assets for the dozens of victims he'd defrauded. The scope of the investigation expanded far beyond what any of us had initially anticipated. Michael's cooperation with federal prosecutors revealed a money laundering operation that stretched across multiple countries and involved dozens of criminals who had been using luxury real estate to clean proceeds from drug trafficking, human smuggling, and weapons sale. His detailed testimony led to arrests in Mexico, the Cayman Islands, and 6 different American cities. Carmen had successfully fled to Vancouver, where she was living under federal protection while prosecutors built cases against the criminal organization that had threatened both her and Michael. She sent me a letter through official channels, expressing gratitude for saving her life even though the process had destroyed everything she believed about her relationship and future. The letter was gracious and heartfelt, revealing someone who was stronger than Michael had given her credit for. "I don't blame you for exposing the truth," she wrote. "You saved my life and probably prevented me from becoming an unknowing accomplice to terrible crimes. I hope someday I can thank you in person for having the courage to do what must have been incredibly difficult." Reading her words, I felt a complicated mixture of solidarity and sadness. Carmen and I had both been victims of Michael's elaborate deceptions, though in very different ways. She'd been manipulated into loving someone who didn't exist, while I'd been abandoned and left to grieve for someone who was very much alive. Neither of us deserved what he'd put us through, but we'd both survived his betrayal and emerged strong. The financial recovery process was more successful than anyone had expected. Michael's cooperation allowed investigators to trace approximately $7.4 million through various offshore accounts and shell companies. While some assets had been spent or hidden too thoroughly to recover, the majority of the stolen money was returned to victims who had thought their investments were lost forever. Robert Kane, Michael's business partner and accomplice, was arrested 3 weeks after Michael's capture when he attempted to access the remaining assets of Rodriguez investment property. His cooperation with prosecutors revealed another layer of corruption that had allowed Michael's schemes to operate undetected for so long. Kane received 8 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution to victims who had trusted him with their financial future. The criminal organization that had been hunting Michael was systematically dismantled over the following year. Vincent Cross, the leader who had ordered Michael's assassination, was arrested in Miami and ultimately received life in prison for running an international money laundering operation that had facilitated hundreds of millions of dollars in criminal proceeds. His capture removed a significant threat not just to Michael and Carmen but to dozens of other people who had become inconvenient witnesses to his organization's activity. 6 months after Michael's arrest, I was sitting in a federal courtroom in Phoenix, watching him testify against the criminals he'd once served. The transformation was remarkable. The confident, sun-tanned man who had been living as Diego Martinez had been replaced by someone who looked older, grayer, and thoroughly defeated by the consequences of his choices. He answered prosecutors' questions with meticulous precision, providing details that helped secure convictions against people who had terrorized communities across multiple continents. During a break in the proceedings, Michael's attorney approached me in the courthouse hallway. "Mr. Rodriguez, my client would like to speak with you privately if you're willing," he said. He understands you have no obligation to meet with him, but he wanted to offer a more complete apology than was possible during his arrest. I wasn't sure what good another conversation with Michael could accomplish, but curiosity won over caution. We met in a small conference room adjacent to the courthouse, with his attorney present to ensure everything remained appropriate and legal. Michael looked exhausted, as if the weight of his crimes and their consequences had finally caught up with him. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "I wanted to thank you for what you did, not just exposing my fraud, but stopping me before I hurt even more people." The gratitude surprised me. "Michael, you're facing 15 years in federal prison because of what I did. Why would you thank me for that?" "Because you prevented me from becoming someone even worse than I already was," he replied. "If you hadn't stopped me, I would have married Carmen under false pretenses, possibly destroyed her life completely, and continued stealing from people who trusted me. You forced me to face consequences that I should have faced 18 months ago." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts before continuing. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did to you, to our marriage, to everyone I hurt. The therapy they provide in federal custody has helped me understand how narcissistic and cruel I was. You deserved so much better than what I put you through." The apology was more thoughtful and complete than anything he'd offered during our confrontation in Puerto Vallarta, but it still felt insufficient for the scope of damage he'd caused. "Michael, I appreciate you saying that, but words can't undo 18 months of grief and self-blame. Words can't give me back the trust I lost in my own judgment. Words can't restore the marriage I thought we had." "I know," he said simply. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sarah. I'm just trying to acknowledge the full extent of what I took from you. You had every right to expose me and destroy the life I built on lies. You showed more integrity in bringing me to justice than I showed in our entire marriage." His attorney indicated that our time was nearly up, but Michael had one more thing he wanted to say. "Sarah, I heard you started a consulting business helping insurance companies investigate suspicious claims. I'm glad you found a way to turn this terrible experience into something positive." I nodded, surprised he'd learned about my new career. "It turns out I have a talent for spotting the signs of staged death fraud. Who knew?" "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for," he said with something that might have been a genuine smile. "I hope you build something amazing with that intelligence." As I left the courthouse that day, I realized the conversation had provided something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not the dramatic emotional catharsis I'd imagined, but a quiet recognition that Michael finally understood the consequences of his choices and that I had successfully moved beyond being defined by his betrayal. Michael ultimately received 15 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The criminal organization he'd helped prosecutors dismantle was responsible for facilitating over $200 million in illegal transactions, making his testimony crucial to protecting future victims from similar schemes. Carmen eventually returned to the United States and settled in Seattle, where she found work with an environmental nonprofit that helps communities develop sustainable tourism practices. She married a marine biologist 2 years later, someone who shared her genuine passion for protecting ocean environments rather than using environmental rhetoric to hide criminal activity. Today, 3 years after confronting Michael in his Puerto Vallarta villa, I run Verified Investigations, a consulting firm that specializes in helping insurance companies identify and expose staged death fraud. My unique perspective as someone who lived through such deception has made me remarkably effective at spotting the warning signs that investigators might otherwise miss. The work is challenging but deeply satisfying. I've helped expose dozens of fraudulent claims that might have otherwise succeeded, preventing insurance companies from paying out millions of dollars to criminals while protecting genuine claimants from increased premium. More importantly, I've helped spare other families from enduring the psychological torture of believing their loved ones are dead when they're actually living comfortable lives elsewhere. The experience of tracking down my supposedly dead husband taught me that betrayal, while devastating, doesn't have to be permanently disabling. It can also be transformative, forcing you to develop capabilities you never knew you possessed,
and resilience you never knew you needed. The woman who collected that life insurance check 18 months after Michael's supposed death was naive enough to believe that people always mean what they say, and that love is always reciprocated honestly. The woman who exposed his fraud in Puerto Vallarta understood that justice sometimes requires taking calculated risks and that the most important relationship you can have is with yourself. She learned that recovery from betrayal begins with refusing to let someone else's choices define your worth or limit your future possibilities. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret pursuing Michael so aggressively, if I should have simply taken the insurance money and moved on without seeking confrontation. The answer is always no. Exposing his fraud wasn't just about recovering stolen money or achieving personal satisfaction, though both of those things mattered. It was about refusing to let him define the narrative of our relationship and its end. Michael thought he could discard me and move on to a better life, leaving me to grieve for a relationship that had apparently meant nothing to him. He discovered that some people become more dangerous when you underestimate their capacity for growth, determination, and strategic thinking. The woman he abandoned was naive enough to trust completely. The woman who exposed him understood that trust must be earned through consistent actions rather than convenient words. The villa in Puerto Vallarta where Michael had built his paradise was eventually sold at auction, and purchased by a retired American couple who transformed it into a bed and breakfast for tourists seeking authentic Mexican hospitality. I hope they're happier there than Michael ever was, and I hope they built their dreams on honest money rather than stolen assets and broken promises. As for me, I've learned that the most effective way to move beyond betrayal is to transform the experience into something that serves a greater purpose. Michael's deception taught me skills that now help other families avoid similar devastation. His crimes provided evidence that helped prosecutors dismantle a criminal network that had been operating for decades. His capture prevented Carmen from unknowingly becoming an accomplice to international money laundering. The pain he caused was real and lasting, but it wasn't meaningless. It became the foundation for a new kind of strength and a new understanding of what justice looks like when the legal system moves too slowly or fails entirely. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones you achieve for yourself, when you refuse to accept the role of victim, and instead become someone who fights back effectively. Michael chose to fake his death rather than face our marital problems honestly. He chose to steal millions rather than build wealth through legitimate means. He chose to manipulate Carmen rather than building a relationship based on truth. Every choice revealed someone who valued his own comfort over other people's well-being, someone who believed he could escape consequences through elaborate deception. But he underestimated the woman he married, just as he underestimated the criminals he betrayed, and the investigators who were tracking him. The supposedly dead wife who appeared in his Mexican paradise was nothing like the grieving widow who had collected his life insurance benefit. She was someone who understood that justice sometimes requires becoming more dangerous than the people who wronged you, and that the best revenge against someone who tried to erase you is becoming someone they never imagined you could become. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.